The laughter started the moment Lorraine Whitmore walked into Morrison's John Deere dealership on a cold April morning in 1979. She was 31 years old, tall, lean from 3 years of working construction after her husband died, wore faded jeans and work boots that had seen better days. Her flannel shirt was clean but patched at the elbows. She'd done the patching herself, sitting at the kitchen table late at night while her 2 daughters slept upstairs. The land was hers now, free and clear. 190 acres of decent ground in central Illinois that had been in her family since 1923. Her uncle Theodore had died 3 weeks earlier, leaving everything to her. No mortgage, no liens, just good farmland that could feed a family if you worked it right. But there was no equipment. Theodore had leased out the ground for the last decade after a stroke made farming impossible. Everything had been sold off years ago to pay medical bills. The tractors, the implements, all of it gone. So Lorraine needed tractors, needed implements, needed everything to start farming from scratch. She walked into Morrison's with a clear plan and $12,000 she'd saved over 8 years. Every overtime hour, every weekend shift, every dollar she could squeeze out of her paycheck while raising 2 daughters alone. $12,000 felt like a fortune. It was everything she had in the world except that land. Frank Morrison greeted her at the door. Mid-50s, thick around the middle, confident smile, expensive watch that caught the morning light. He'd been selling John Deere equipment in this county for 23 years, knew every farmer within 50 miles. "Lorraine," he said, extending his hand, "heard about your uncle. Sorry for your loss. Theodore was a good man." "Thank you, Frank, I appreciate it. But congratulations on the land. That's one hell of an inheritance. 190 acres of primo ground. You're a lucky woman." "I know it." Frank put his hand on her shoulder, led her deeper into the showroom. The dealership was impressive. Bright lights, polished concrete floors, the smell of new rubber and fresh paint and hydraulic fluid. 6 brand new tractors sat on display. John Deere, green and yellow, gleaming like jewels under the fluorescent lights. "So you're here to get set up for farming," Frank said. "Good, smart. Let me show you what we've got." He walked her past the smaller models, moving with the practiced ease of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. Stopped in front of 2 massive machines that dominated the center of the showroom. "Now, for your operation, I'm thinking a 4440 would be perfect. Maybe a 4240 if you want to save a little money. Both great machines. Modern, reliable, efficient. Got the power you need for 190 acres. Lorraine looked at the price tags. The 4240 was listed at $38,000. The 4440 at $46,000. Her entire savings was $12,000. She felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Frank, those are really nice tractors, but I can't afford them." Frank leaned back against the 4240, arms crossed. His smile never wavered. "Lorraine, let me be straight with you. You walk out of here without financing, you're making a mistake that'll haunt you for years." "Frank, I appreciate—" "No, listen, I've been doing this 23 years. You know what separates successful farmers from failures? One thing: willingness to invest. Your Uncle Theodore, God rest his soul, he was old school, cash only. You know what that got him? Stuck at the same size operation for 40 years while his neighbors quadrupled their acreage." Lorraine's jaw tightened. "My uncle died with no debt, slept well every night." "Sure, and he died farming the same 190 acres he started with. Is that what you want for your daughters? To watch you struggle with antique equipment while their friends' parents drive new trucks and take vacations?" The mention of her daughters hit like a physical blow. Darlene was 8, Becky was 6, both still grieving their father, both looking to Lorraine to build them a future. And here was this man, this dealer with his expensive watch and confident smile, telling her she was failing them. "My daughters will learn that peace of mind is worth more than a vacation." Frank laughed. Not unkindly, but with the patronizing amusement of someone who thinks he knows better. "Peace of mind doesn't pay for college, Lorraine. You've got what, an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old? College is 10 years away. You keep farming with junk equipment, you'll be lucky to afford community college. What about used tractors? Do you have any of those? Frank's smile tightened, just slightly. Lorraine noticed. She'd been reading people's faces for 3 years, ever since the accident that killed her husband. You learned to see the small changes, the micro-expressions that told you what someone really thought. We don't carry much used inventory, Frank said. The market's hot right now. Used equipment sells quick. We get something in, it's gone in a week. He paused, studying her. But honestly, Lorraine, you don't want to start your operation with used equipment. You need reliability. You need warranty coverage. You need parts support. You need modern efficiency. I need something I can afford without taking on debt I'm not sure I can service. Frank's expression changed. The friendliness evaporated, replaced by something harder, more calculating. That's what everyone says when they first look at the numbers. But Lorraine, think about it this way. You've got to invest to succeed. Farming isn't cheap. You've got to spend money to make money. You can't compete with neighbors who have modern equipment if you're running old junk that breaks down every other week. He moved closer, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. Here's what we do. 10% down. That's $3,800 on the 4240. We finance the rest over 7 years at 12%. Your monthly payment would be about $620. That's manageable. That's what farming costs in 1979. Lorraine did the math in her head. $620 a month. 12 months a year. 7 years. That was over $52,000 total for a $38,000 tractor. $14,000 in interest alone. More than her entire savings. That's a lot of interest, Frank. It's the cost of doing business. Look, I understand you're nervous. You're new to farming. You're doing this alone. But Lorraine, that's exactly why you need good equipment. You can't afford downtime, can't afford repairs, can't afford to fall behind. And if you try to start with some old piece of junk from an auction, that's exactly what's going to happen. Let me think about it. Sure, take your time. But his tone said otherwise. Don't wait too long, though. These 4,240s are moving fast. I've sold 3 this month already. Spring planting's coming up. You need to get set up. And Lorraine? He put his hand on her shoulder again. I'd hate to see you fail because you were too scared to invest in success. Lorraine thanked him and left the dealership. Sat in her truck in the parking lot for 15 minutes. Just thinking, doing the math over and over in her head. $620 a month for 7 years. $52,000 for a $38,000 tractor. What if grain prices dropped? What if she had a bad crop year? What if the tractor broke down and she couldn't afford the repairs on top of the payment? She'd lose everything. The tractor, probably the land too, trying to keep up with payments she couldn't make. There had to be another way. She drove straight to the local auction yard. There was an estate sale scheduled for that Saturday. She'd seen the equipment list in the newspaper. 2 International Harvester Farmalls were listed among the items. Old machines, but machines that might work. Saturday morning came cold and overcast. Lorraine arrived at the auction yard at 7 in the morning, 2 hours before the sale started. She wanted to inspect the equipment before bidding. The yard was muddy from recent rain. About 40 pieces of equipment scattered across 2 acres. Tractors, planters, plows, combines, all of it from the Hendricks estate. Old man Hendricks had died at 86, been farming until the day before his stroke. His children lived in the city, didn't want anything to do with farming, selling it all. Lorraine found the 2 Farmalls parked next to each other near the back of the lot. The first was a 1954 International Harvester Farmall Super MTA diesel engine. The paint was faded to almost pink in places, rust spots on the fenders, dents in the hood. But Lorraine had worked on equipment long enough to see past the cosmetics. She climbed up, sat in the seat. The metal was cold and damp from the morning dew. She checked the oil, dirty but full. Tried to turn the engine over by hand. It moved, not seized. She checked the tires, old but holding air. Examined the hydraulic lines, some cracking but not leaking. This tractor had been maintained, not lovingly, but adequately. Someone had taken care of it. The second was a 1960 Farmall 560 gas engine, also showing its age, paint faded, rust, dents. But again, Lorraine could tell someone had taken care of it. The engine wasn't seized. The sheet metal was intact. The clutch pedal felt wrong though, too soft, probably needed a clutch. That would cost money. But both tractors were fundamentally sound. They'd run. They'd work. They just needed some maintenance, some tender, loving care. An older farmer walked over. Lorraine recognized him, Earl Jackson. Farmed about 8 miles away. She'd seen him at church. "You thinking about bidding on these?" he asked. "Maybe. You know anything about them?" "I do. Hendricks bought the Super MTA new in '54. That's been his main tractor for 25 years. The 560 he picked up used in '67 or '68. Both good tractors, reliable. He took care of his equipment. Not perfect, but good enough." "Think they're worth buying?" Earl shrugged. "Depends what you want them for. If you're trying to impress neighbors or compete with folks running new equipment, no. But if you want tractors that'll work and won't bankrupt you, yes. Old Hendricks farmed 240 acres his whole life with those 2 tractors and not much else. Made a living, raised 4 kids, retired with money in the bank." "That's what I'm trying to do," Lorraine said. "Then you're looking at the right equipment. Just don't expect anyone to be impressed." At 9 o'clock, the auction started. The auctioneer, a fast-talking man named Dutch Williams, who'd been running auctions in the county for 30 years, worked through the household items first. Furniture, dishes, tools. Then he moved to farm implements. A grain drill sold for $800, a plow for $650, a disc for $400. Then he got to the tractors. "All right, folks," Dutch called out, his voice carrying across the crowd of about 50 people. "Next up, we got a 1954 International Harvester Farmall Super MTA diesel. You all see it sitting over there. It runs, starts, needs some cosmetic work. But it's a good working tractor. Been on this farm for 25 years. Who will start me at 3,000? Silence. People looked at the tractor. Several shook their heads. Lorraine heard someone mutter, "That's ancient." "All right, 2,500? Nothing. 2,000? Still nothing. 1,500 to get us started? Lorraine raised her hand. Her heart was pounding. What if Frank Morrison was right? What if these were junk? 1,200, she called out. Someone in the crowd snickered. Then another. Lorraine felt her face get hot, but she kept her hand up. Dutch looked around. I got 1,200. Anyone give me 13? Silence. 1,200 going once. Nothing. Twice. Still nothing. Sold to the young lady in the flannel shirt for $1,200. A smattering of applause. Lorraine wasn't sure if it was congratulatory or mocking. Probably both. The 560 came up next. 1960 Farmall 560 gas engine, Dutch announced. Same deal, folks. It runs. Needs some work. Good tractor for someone who wants to put a little elbow grease into it. Who will start me at 2,000? Nothing. 1,500? Nothing. 1,000? Lorraine raised her hand again. This was it. This was her entire farming operation. 2 old tractors everyone was laughing at. 900, she said. This time the snicker was louder. Someone said, loud enough for people nearby to hear, "What's she going to do with that junk? Open a museum?" Another voice. "Poor woman, doesn't know what she's getting into." Dutch ignored it. 900. Anyone else? Nothing. Sold for 900 to the same young lady. Lorraine paid the total with a check she'd written that morning. $2,100. Added a $100 buyer's premium. $2,200 total. She had $9,800 left of her $12,000. As she was finishing the paperwork, a voice behind her said, "That's one hell of a gamble you just made." Lorraine turned. Frank Morrison stood there, arms crossed, expensive leather jacket over his dealership polo, smirking. "Frank, didn't know you came to auctions. Sometimes I check them out, see what the competition's selling, see what desperate farmers are buying." He looked at the 2 Farmalls sitting in the muddy lot. Lorraine could see the judgment in his eyes, the contempt. "Those are junk, Lorraine. They're 25 and 19 years old. You just wasted $2,200. You threw away good money on scrap metal with wheels." "They run. They work. That's all I need." "No, that's not all you need." Frank moved closer, lowered his voice so only she could hear. "You need reliability. You need efficiency. You need parts availability. Those old Farmalls parts are going to be expensive if you can even find them. Downtime is going to kill you. You'll spend more time fixing them than farming with them." "We'll see." "No, Lorraine, we won't see. We know. I've been in this business for 23 years. I've seen hundreds of young farmers try to start out cheap with old equipment, trying to save money."
You know how many of them actually succeeded?
He paused for effect, making sure she was listening. "Maybe 1 in 10. 1. The rest either upgraded to proper equipment within 3 years or quit farming altogether, because you can't compete in modern agriculture with museum pieces." "Then I guess I'll be that 1 in 10. Frank laughed. Actually laughed out loud. Several people turned to look. Lorraine felt her face burning, the humiliation of it, standing there in the muddy auction yard while this man, this dealer who made his living selling debt to farmers, laughed at her choices. In front of strangers, in front of Earl Jackson, in front of everyone. "Lorraine, I like your optimism. I really do, it's cute. But optimism doesn't harvest crops. Modern equipment does. When those old Farmalls break down, and they will, trust me they will, you come see me. I'll still make you a deal on a proper tractor. Might even give you a little trade-in credit for the scrap metal." He walked away, still chuckling, shaking his head, talking to another farmer, probably about her, probably about the foolish widow who'd just bought junk. Lorraine stood there in the muddy yard, looking at her 2 old Farmalls, wondering if everyone was right, wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake, wondering if she was about to fail her daughters, fail her uncle's memory, fail everything. Then Earl Jackson walked over, put his hand on her shoulder. "Don't listen to him," Earl said quietly. "Those are good tractors. They'll work. And more importantly, they're yours. You own them. Nobody can take them away from you. What if they break down? Then you fix them. You've got hands. You've got a brain. You can figure it out." He smiled. "My father used to say something. He said the best tractor isn't the newest tractor. It's the one you own free and clear, because a paid-for tractor that breaks down is still better than a financed tractor that runs perfect."
You can always fix mechanical problems, but you can't fix a payment you can't afford.
Lorraine felt tears sting her eyes. "Thank you, Earl. Don't thank me, just prove them all wrong." She borrowed Earl's trailer and hauled both tractors home, parked them in her uncle's old barn, stood there looking at them in the dim light. 25 and 19 years old, faded paint, rust spots, battle scars, but they were hers. Now, before we go any further, I need you to understand what Lorraine Whitmore was attempting in April of 1979. She wasn't just trying to farm with old equipment. She was trying to prove an entire philosophy that went against everything the agricultural industry was telling farmers to do. She was trying to prove that you could build a farming operation without debt, that you could succeed with paid-for equipment instead of financed equipment, that you could farm 190 acres without a $600 a month payment hanging over your head like an executioner's blade. She spent April and the first half of May working on both tractors. Her uncle's old barn became her shop. It wasn't much, dirt floor, leaky roof, no heat, but it had space and tools, and that was enough. The 1954 Super MTA needed work, but it wasn't major. Hydraulic seals were leaking. Lorraine ordered new ones from a salvage yard 2 counties over for $60. Spent 2 evenings replacing them, her hands black with grease, her back aching. Changed the oil and all the filters. Another $40. Found a crack in the fuel tank that was seeping. Welded it herself after draining the tank, borrowing a welder from Earl Jackson. The air filter was so clogged, it was a miracle the engine ran at all. New filter cost $35. Total cost for the Super MTA, about $280 in parts. Time invested, about 40 hours, spread over 2 weeks. She worked on it after putting her daughters to bed, 8-year-old Darlene and 6-year-old Becky would be asleep upstairs in the old farmhouse, while Lorraine worked in that cold barn, hands numb, shoulders screaming, wondering if she was doing the right thing. The 1960 560 needed more. The clutch was definitely bad, slipping under load. She found a used clutch assembly at a tractor salvage yard for $90. Drove out there on a Saturday morning, Darlene and Becky in the truck with her, made a day of it. The girls played in the salvage yard, climbing on old tractors, while Lorraine searched for parts. Brought the clutch home and spent an entire weekend installing it. Had to split the tractor, separate the engine from the transmission, which meant pulling it apart in the middle. Hardest mechanical job Lorraine had ever done. Her hands were blistered by the end of the first day. Her shoulders screamed. But she got it done. While she had the tractor apart, she fixed an oil leak from the rear main seal, replaced some worn steering components, fixed a hydraulic line that was cracked. Total cost for the 560, about $230 in parts. Time, about 50 hours over 2 weekends. By early June, both tractors were running strong. Lorraine's total equipment investment was $2,100 for the tractors, $510 in repairs, plus the $100 buyer's premium. $2,710 total. Compare that to the $38,000 4240 Frank Morrison had tried to sell her, or the $620 monthly payment, $5,200 a year, that would have come with it. She took stock of her situation. She had $9,700 left. Needed seed. That would cost about $1,800. Needed fertilizer. Another $1,000. Needed fuel. Maybe $500 for the season. That left $4,800 for living expenses and emergencies. It would be tight, but possible. She planted 80 acres of corn and 80 acres of soybeans. Borrowed a 4-row planter from Earl Jackson, paid him back by helping with his wheat harvest in July. 3 days of hard work running a grain cart. The Super MTA became her primary field tractor. It had more power, could pull bigger implements. The 560 handled lighter work, running the cultivator, hauling wagons, doing odd jobs around the farm. They were slow, no question about that. Modern tractors had twice the horsepower, could cover ground twice as fast. Her neighbors with 4440s could plant their fields in 3 days. Took Lorraine almost 2 weeks. But speed didn't matter if you couldn't make the payment. All summer, people would see Lorraine out in the fields on those old red tractors and shake their heads. At the co-op, she'd hear the comments. That Whitmore widow's going to learn the hard way. Those old Farmalls are going to break down mid-season and leave her stranded. She'll be shopping for real equipment by fall. Just watch. Lorraine kept working. Up before dawn, out in the fields until dark. The Super MTA ran hot in the summer sun. No cab, no air conditioning, just an umbrella Lorraine rigged up for shade. The 560 had a habit of vapor locking on really hot days. Lorraine learned to pour cool water on the fuel pump to get it going again. But they worked, every day, through June, July, August. The routine of farming, planting, cultivating, maintaining. They worked. Harvest came in early October. Lorraine hired a custom harvester to combine her corn and beans. Couldn't afford her own combine yet, and Earl Jackson's was tied up with his own harvest. The corn made 85 bushels per acre. Not spectacular, but decent for first-year ground that hadn't been farmed in a decade. Soybeans made 32 bushels per acre. Again, decent. Grain prices were okay in 1979. Not great, but okay. Corn was around $2.40 per bushel. Soybeans, around $6.50. Lorraine did the math. 80 acres corn times 85 bushels times $2.40. 16,320. 80 acres beans times 32 bushels times $6.50. 16,640. Total gross, 30,960. Expenses, seed, 1,800. Fertilizer, 1,000. Fuel, 600, less than estimated. Custom harvesting, 2,200. Miscellaneous, 400. Total expenses, 6,000. Net income from farming, 24,960. But Lorraine also had living expenses. She'd kept those minimal, lived in her uncle's old farmhouse, cooked her own meals, didn't go out much. Figured she spent about $12,000 for the year. Food, utilities, clothes for the girls, school supplies, the basics. That left about $13,000. She put $10,000 into savings, kept $3,000 as operating cash for the next year. She'd made it through year one.
The farm hadn't made her rich, but she'd survived.
More importantly, she'd proven the tractors could do the work. When Frank Morrison heard about Lorraine's harvest numbers at the co-op, small towns, everyone knows everyone's business, he was genuinely surprised. "Huh," he said to another dealer. "Maybe those old Farmalls had more life in them than I thought." But then he added, "Let's see if they make it through year two. First year's the easy one." 3 weeks later, Thanksgiving arrived. Lorraine's brother-in-law Garrett was married to Vivian Caldwell. Vivian was 35 years old, 4 years older than Lorraine. She'd grown up with money. Her father owned a car dealership in Chicago. She'd married Garrett expecting a certain lifestyle. And when Garrett's construction business started doing well in the late 70s, she got it. They just bought a new house, $85,000, borrowed 80% of it.
$68,000 mortgage at 13%. Monthly payment around $900.
It was a beautiful house, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, attached garage, in the nicest subdivision in town. Vivian also drove a BMW, leased it, $450 a month, silver, leather interior. She loved that car more than anything except maybe her house. Thanksgiving 1979 was at Garrett and Vivian's new house. The whole family, Garrett's mother, Irene, his 2 sisters, Lorraine and her 2 daughters, Vivian's parents up from Chicago, about 15 people total. Vivian had been cooking for 3 days, turkey, ham, 3 kinds of potatoes, 4 kinds of pie. The dining room table was loaded with food. The house smelled like heaven. Crystal glasses, china plates, everything perfect. They just sat down to eat when Vivian pulled out her car keys, dropped them on the table next to her plate. The BMW key fob, silver and blue,
gleaming under the chandelier light.
"So," Vivian said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Garrett and I just got back from test driving the new 7 Series. We're thinking about trading up next year. The lease on this one ends in March." Everyone made appropriate noises, impressed sounds. Vivian beamed. Then she turned to Lorraine, smiled. That smile Lorraine had learned to recognize over the past year. The one that meant something cutting was coming. "Lorraine, I saw you in town last week. You were driving that old Chevy. What year is it again? 71? 72? 71, Lorraine said quietly. 8 years old, goodness. Does it still run okay? Or are you just too thrifty to buy something newer? She said the word thrifty with a slight emphasis, a knowing look at her mother, a shared joke. The table went quiet. Everyone heard it. The edge in Vivian's voice. Everyone knew what thrifty meant when Vivian said it. It meant cheap. It meant poor. It meant less than.
Lorraine set down her fork carefully, looked at Vivian, kept her voice calm, level, the way she'd learned to do in the 3 years since her husband died, when people looked at her with pity and said things they thought were helpful but weren't. "It runs fine, Vivian, and it's paid for. I sleep well at night, knowing I don't owe anyone anything. But don't you want something nice, something new?" Vivian's voice had that false concern, that condescending sympathy. "Life's short, Lorraine. You should enjoy it. You can't take it with you. Your uncle learned that, didn't he? Died with all that money in the bank and never got to enjoy any of it. I am enjoying life. I'm raising my daughters. I'm farming my land. I'm building something that'll last." Vivian laughed, a bright, tinkling sound that made Lorraine's stomach tighten. "Building something? Honey, you bought 2 tractors that belong in a museum. Everyone's talking about it." Frank Morrison told Garrett you spent $2,200 on junk that'll break down before spring planting.
He said you could have had a real tractor, a new one with financing, but you were too scared to take on debt like a normal farmer. The table was silent now. Garrett's mother looked uncomfortable. His sisters were staring at their plates. Vivian's parents were watching with interest,
like this was dinner theatre. Lorraine's daughters, Darlene and Becky, sat frozen, not understanding exactly what was happening, but knowing their mother was being hurt. Lorraine stood up, carefully placed her napkin next to her plate. "Thank you for the meal, Vivian. It was lovely, but I think we need to go." "Oh, don't be so sensitive, I'm just teasing." But Vivian's smile said otherwise, said she'd landed the blow exactly where she intended. "No, you're not." Lorraine gathered her daughters, got their coats from the closet. Her hands were shaking.
From anger or hurt or both, she wasn't sure. Darlene was crying. Becky was trying not to. They walked out into the cold November night, got in that 8-year-old Chevy, drove home in silence. When they got home, Lorraine sat in the truck in the driveway for 5 minutes. Just sat there, looking at the old farmhouse, looking at the barn where the 2 Farmalls were parked, wondering if Vivian was right, if Frank Morrison was right, if everyone was right. Maybe she was just fooling herself. Maybe you couldn't build something real without debt. Maybe the modern way was the only way. Maybe she was depriving her daughters of a normal childhood because she was too scared to borrow money like everyone else. Then Darlene's voice came from the passenger seat, small, uncertain. "Mama, why does Aunt Vivian hate us?" Lorraine's heart broke. She turned to her daughter, saw the confusion in those 9-year-old eyes, the hurt. "She doesn't hate us, baby." "Yes, she does. She said we're poor, in front of everyone." Lorraine got out of the truck, opened the passenger door, helped both daughters out, took them inside, made them hot chocolate, sat with them at the kitchen table, and tried to explain something she barely understood herself. "Darlene, Becky, listen to me. Aunt Vivian doesn't hate us. She's scared." "Scared of what?" Becky asked. "Scared that maybe she's wrong. You see, Aunt Vivian measures success by what she can show off. New cars, big house, fancy things. And when she sees us being happy without those things, it scares her. Because if we can be happy with old trucks and old tractors, then maybe all her new stuff isn't as important as she thinks it is." Darlene looked at her mother with solemn eyes. "Are we poor, Mama?" Lorraine thought about that. Thought about the 9,800 in the bank. Thought about the 2 old tractors that everyone laughed at. Thought about the house that needed paint, and the truck that was 8 years old, and the fact that her daughter's clothes came from garage sales and thrift stores. "No, baby, we're not poor. We're free. We don't owe anyone money. This house is ours. That land is ours. Those tractors are ours. Nobody can take them away. And that freedom, that peace of knowing we're okay no matter what happens, that's worth more than anything Aunt Vivian has." "But she has such nice things." "Does she? Or does the bank have nice things that she gets to borrow?" Lorraine pulled both daughters close. "Let me tell you something. Aunt Vivian lies awake at night, worrying about money. I know because I've talked to your Uncle Garrett. She worries about the house payment, the car payment, all the bills. She doesn't sleep well. But me? I fall asleep within 5 minutes every night. Because I don't owe anyone anything." That night, after putting both girls to bed, Lorraine sat in her darkened bedroom, curtains drawn, and let herself cry. Really cry. The kind of crying she hadn't allowed herself since her husband's funeral. Because what Vivian had done wasn't just mean. It was calculated. It was designed to hit her where it hurt most. Her children. Every mother's worst fear isn't being judged herself. It's watching her children be judged because of her choices, seeing them hurt, excluded, made to feel less than. She got up, walked to the mirror, looked at herself. 31 years old, already had grey hairs, lines around her eyes from squinting in the sun, hands rough and calloused from working on equipment. She didn't look like Vivian, would never look like Vivian. But you know what? She could sleep at night, could look at herself in the mirror without wondering how she was going to make a payment, could wake up every morning without a knot of anxiety in her stomach about debt. That had to be worth something. That had to be worth everything. She climbed into bed, and despite the tears, despite the humiliation, despite the doubt, she fell asleep within 5 minutes. Deep, dreamless. The sleep of someone who owed nothing to anyone. And that peaceful sleep, that deep, dreamless rest that comes from having zero debt, was going to be the most valuable thing she owned in the years to come. Because the good times were about to end, and when they did, that sleep would be the difference between survival and catastrophe. Lorraine didn't know it yet, but the decision she'd made, buying 2 tractors everyone said were worthless, would be the difference between keeping her farm and losing everything. But first, she had to survive the pressure, the judgment, the constant, grinding doubt that maybe everyone else was right and she was wrong. Year 2 was 1980, and 1980 was the year that would test everything she believed.
Year 2 began on a January morning so cold the diesel in the Super MTA wouldn't start. Lorraine stood in the barn at 5:30 in the morning, breath fogging in the frigid air, pouring warm water over the fuel lines to get the tractor running. Her fingers were numb, her shoulders ached from working late the night before, fixing a hydraulic line that had cracked in the cold. But the tractor started, coughed, sputtered, then roared to life with that deep diesel rumble that Lorraine was beginning to love. 26 years old, and that engine still had heart. She needed to move snow, clear the driveway so Darlene and Becky could catch the school bus. The county plough wouldn't come down their road until afternoon if they came at all. So Lorraine rigged up a blade she'd bought at auction for $80, bolted it to the front of the Super MTA, and spent an hour clearing snow in the pre-dawn darkness. When she came back inside, her daughters were eating cereal at the kitchen table. Darlene looked up, worry in her 9-year-old eyes. "Mama, is the tractor going to break?" "Why would you ask that, baby?" "Because Aunt Vivian said it would, at Thanksgiving. She said you bought junk that would break before spring." Lorraine poured herself coffee, sat down at the table. Her body ached. She'd been awake since 4:30, had another full day of work ahead. But she chose her words carefully. "Those tractors are old, but they're not junk. They were built back when things were made to last. And yes, sometimes they need fixing, but that's okay, because they're ours. We own them. Nobody can take them away from us." "Is that why you don't buy a new one?" Becky asked, 7 years old now, and already understanding more than Lorraine wished she had to. "That's part of it, sweetheart. A new tractor costs a lot of money, more money than Mama has. If I borrowed money to buy one, I'd have to pay the bank every single month. And if something went wrong, if the crops didn't grow good or the prices dropped, I might not be able to pay them back. And then they could take the tractor, and maybe even our farm." "So we're playing it safe," Darlene said. "We're playing it smart." But as winter turned to spring, Lorraine started wondering if smart was the same thing as foolish. Because everywhere she looked, everyone else seemed to be winning at a game she wasn't playing. The agricultural boom of 1980 was unlike anything anyone had seen. Corn prices climbed to $3.50 a bushel by March. Soybeans hit $7.60. Export markets to the Soviet Union and China were wide open. The government was encouraging production. Plant fence row to fence row, they said. America was feeding the world. And farmland values were going insane. 15% year-over-year gains in some areas, 20% in others. Land that sold for $1,000 an acre in 1978 was going for $1,200 in 1980. The logic was simple. Buy land now, even with borrowed money, because it would be worth more next year. You'd build equity, even while paying interest. Every farmer Lorraine knew was expanding, trading up, leveraging, growing. She heard it at church, at the co-op, at the diner where she sometimes took the girls for breakfast on Saturdays as a treat. Everyone talking about their new equipment, their additional acreage, their plans for the future. And Vivian never let her forget it. It was a Sunday in April, after church, everyone standing around in the parking lot, the way people do in small towns, talking, catching up. The sun was warm. Spring was coming. Farmers were getting ready to plant. Vivian pulled up in her BMW, stepped out wearing a dress that probably cost more than Lorraine spent on groceries in a month. Designer shoes, perfect hair. She walked over to the group of women that included Lorraine. Smiled that smile. "Lorraine, I keep meaning to ask, are you still planning to farm with those old tractors this year? Or did you finally break down and buy something from this decade?" The other women looked uncomfortable. They knew what was happening. Everyone knew what Vivian thought of Lorraine's choices, but nobody said anything. Small town dynamics. Don't get involved, don't make waves. Same tractors, Lorraine said quietly. They work fine. But they're so slow. I was talking to Garrett last night. He said it took you 2 weeks to plant last year. Most farmers finished in 3 days. Don't you get tired of being so far behind everyone else? Lorraine felt her face flush, felt the familiar heat of embarrassment rising up her neck. Other women were listening now, pretending not to, but listening, judging. I get it done. That's what matters. Is it, though? Vivian leaned against her BMW, studied her perfectly manicured nails, then looked up with false concern. Because Garrett also said you could probably handle more ground if you had modern equipment. Earl Jackson's looking to lease out 80 acres. With a real tractor, you could take that on, make more money, give your girls a better life. But I guess you're content to stay small, stay poor, stay behind. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Your girls deserve better. You're depriving them. You're being selfish with your fear of debt. Lorraine excused herself, got her daughters from Sunday school, drove home in silence. And for the first time since buying those Farmalls, she seriously considered if maybe Vivian was right. Maybe she was being selfish. Maybe her fear of debt was robbing her children of opportunities. That night, after putting Darlene and Becky to bed, Lorraine sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, did calculations, ran numbers. If she leased Earl's 80 acres, she'd need to pay about $40 per acre. That was $3,200. If she financed a newer tractor, say that $4,240 Frank Morrison had tried to sell her, the payment would be around $550 a month, $6,600 a year. Total additional costs, $9,800. Against what? Maybe an extra 6,400 bushels of corn. At $350 a bushel, that was $22,400 gross. Minus expenses for seed, fertilizer, fuel, harvesting. Call it $12,000 in costs. Net income, maybe $10,000. But $10,000 wasn't guaranteed. It depended on weather, on prices, on 100 things that could go wrong. While the $9,800 in fixed costs was certain. She'd owe it whether the crop succeeded or not. She was still sitting there staring at the numbers when the phone rang. 9:30 at night. Who would call this late? It was Colette Brennan, her neighbor to the east, 42 years old, farmed 280 acres with her husband Raymond. They'd been neighbors for a year now. Friendly, helloed each other when needed, borrowed equipment back and forth. Colette's voice was strained, tight with something Lorraine couldn't quite identify. Fear? Regret? Lorraine, I hope it's not too late to call. Not at all. What's wrong? Nothing. Nothing yet. I needed to talk to someone. Raymond's asleep. He doesn't understand why I'm worried. Worried about what? A long pause. Lorraine could hear Colette breathing, could hear the sound of ice clinking in a glass. Was she drinking? We bought a new tractor last month. A 4440. Beautiful machine. Raymond's so proud of it. But Lorraine, it cost $42,000. We borrowed almost all of it. The payment is $650 a month. Lorraine's stomach dropped. She knew where this was going. Did something happen? No, not yet. But I can't sleep. I lie awake at night doing the math. $650 a month is $7,800 a year. For 7 years. That's almost $55,000 total for a $42,000 tractor. $13,000 in interest. And what if something goes wrong? What if prices drop? What if we have a bad year? We could lose everything. The tractor, the land, everything my husband's family built for 3 generations. Why did you buy it then? Because everyone said we should. Frank Morrison, the banker, even Raymond, they all said the same thing. Land values are going up. Grain prices are high. This is the time to grow. If we don't leverage up now, we'll be left behind. Colette's voice cracked. But Lorraine, I see you farming with those old Farmalls, and you sleep at night. I know you do, I can tell.
You're calm, at peace, and I haven't slept properly in a month. Colette. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have called. I just needed to tell someone who might understand. Everyone else thinks I'm crazy for worrying. But you chose differently. You said no to debt.
And I wish I'd done the same. They talked for an hour. Lorraine tried to be encouraging, tried to say the right things. But after she hung up, she sat there in the dark kitchen feeling something cold settle in her chest. A premonition, a sense that something bad was coming. And she was right. Spring planting went smoothly. The Super MTA and the 560 worked every day, slow but steady. Lorraine planted the same 160 acres, 80 corn, 80 beans, same as last year. No expansion, no debt, just simple, conservative farming. Her neighbors finished planting in 3 days with their new equipment. Lorraine took 12. But she didn't care anymore. She'd stopped comparing herself to them, stopped worrying about being behind, because she'd realized something important. In farming, fast doesn't matter if you can't afford the speed. Summer came hot and dry. The corn grew tall. The beans looked good. Lorraine spent her days cultivating, maintaining, fixing small things that broke. The 560's radiator developed a leak. She patched it herself with a welding iron and some sealant. $30 in materials, 3 hours of work. A dealership would have charged $500 and 3 days of downtime. In June, Frank Morrison came by the farm. Lorraine was in the barn, changing oil on the Super MTA, when she heard a vehicle pull up. Looked out to see Frank's new Suburban, expensive, gleaming, chrome wheels. He got out wearing sunglasses and a polo shirt with the John Deere logo embroidered on the chest. "Lorraine, got a minute?" She wiped her hands on a rag, walked out into the sunlight. "Sure, Frank. What brings you out here?" "Well, I've got to hand it to you. You made it through a year with those old Farmalls. I'm impressed. Really am. Proved they could do the work." "They're doing fine. Proved you could farm. Everyone respects that." He walked over to the Super MTA, looked it up and down, touched the faded paint, got rust on his fingers, wiped them on his pants with a look of distaste. "But you've proven your point now. You've shown everyone you can make it work. Now it's time to upgrade to equipment that'll let you really succeed, really compete, really provide for your daughters the way they deserve." The mention of her daughters made Lorraine's jaw tighten. "I'm not interested in competing. I'm interested in farming." "But that's the same thing, Lorraine. Look." He moved closer, lowered his voice like he was sharing insider information. "I've got a barely used 4240 that just came in on trade. Beautiful machine. Only 200 hours on it. Guy upgraded to a 4640 after 1 year because his operation took off. That's what good equipment does. It lets you grow. I can let you have the 4240 for $32,000. That's $6,000 off new, and I can get you financed with just $2,000 down. Your payment would be about $550 a month." Lorraine set down the oil filter she was holding, looked at Frank Morrison, really looked at him, saw the expensive watch, the designer sunglasses, the leather shoes that probably cost more than she spent on clothes in a year. And she understood something with perfect clarity. This man made his living selling debt. Every tractor he financed generated commission. Every farmer who borrowed money put money in his pocket. 8% commission on a $30,000 loan was $2,400. That was his motivation, not her success, his profit. "Frank, I appreciate you thinking of me, but I'm not taking on $30,000 of debt. These 2 Farmalls are paid for, they work. That's all I need. But you're leaving money on the table. With modern equipment, you could farm faster, more efficiently. You could take on more ground. Earl Jackson's looking to lease out 80 acres. I heard him mention it at the co-op. With a 4240, you could handle it easy. That's potential income you're missing because you're too stubborn to invest in your operation." "And how much would that cost me?" "Well, lease payment on the ground would be maybe $40 an acre. That's $3,200. Your tractor payment would be about $550 a month, $6,600 a year. Call it $10,000 total. To make maybe $8,000 net if everything goes perfect, if prices stay high, if the weather cooperates, if the tractor doesn't break down, if nothing goes wrong." "But Lorraine,
Land values are going up 15% a year. Grain prices are at record highs. This is the time to leverage up and grow. Everyone's doing it. The successful farmers, the ones who are going to own this county in 10 years, they're all expanding right now. And the ones who are too scared to invest? They're going to be left behind, working for wages,
renting their land to guys like me who had the guts to take risks. She knew she shouldn't say it, knew she should just thank him politely and send him on his way. But something inside her, some combination of frustration and conviction and certainty, made her speak. That's exactly what worries me, Frank. When everyone's saying the same thing, when everyone's confident, when it seems too good to be true, that's usually right before everything falls apart. I've read history. I know what happened in the 20s, the boom that became a bust, the farmers who lost everything because they borrowed too much. Frank laughed, that same condescending laugh from the auction yard, the laugh that had humiliated her in front of 40 people. He took off his sunglasses, looked at Lorraine with something between pity and contempt. Lorraine, you really think there's going to be some kind of crisis? Agriculture is booming. This is the best time in history to be a farmer. Grain prices are at record highs. Export markets are wide open. The government's encouraging production. Land values are rising faster than stocks. This is the opportunity of a lifetime, and you're missing it because you're scared. I prefer to call it cautious. Frank shook his head, put his sunglasses back on, started walking to his Suburban. Then he turned back, and there was genuine pity in his voice now. Lorraine, you're going to regret this. I'm telling you, in 5 years you'll be farming the same 190 acres with the same old tractors, while your neighbors own 500, 1,000 acres with modern equipment and operations that actually make money. And you'll realize you missed the opportunity of a lifetime because you were too scared to take a calculated risk. You'll watch your daughters grow up poor while their cousins have everything. And you'll know it was your fault, your choice, your fear. Maybe in 5 years, I'll still be farming while they're working in town, because they couldn't make their payments when things got tough. Frank got in his Suburban. The engine started with that smooth, quiet purr of expensive machinery. He rolled down the window. When you change your mind, and you will, come see me. I'll still make you a deal, but the longer you wait, the further behind you'll fall. And Lorraine, your daughters deserve better than this. He drove away, leaving Lorraine standing in a cloud of dust, his final words echoing in her mind. Your daughters deserve better than this. That night she couldn't sleep, tossed and turned, got up at 2 a.m, stood at the window, looking out at the barn where the 2 Farmalls sat in the darkness. Were they enough? Was she enough? Was she sacrificing her daughter's future because she was too scared to borrow money? She called Irene the next morning. Her mother-in-law, 70 years old now, widow herself, had buried her son, Lorraine's husband, 3 years ago. They'd grown close in the years since, talked on the phone several times a week. Irene, can I ask you something? Of course, dear. How do you know if you're being wise or if you're just being afraid? A long pause. Then Irene said, Tell me what's bothering you. Lorraine told her everything. The conversation with Frank Morrison, the pressure from Vivian, the doubts that kept her awake at night, the fear that she was depriving her daughters of a better life because she was too scared to borrow money, the worry that maybe everyone else was right and she was wrong. Irene listened, didn't interrupt. Let Lorraine talk until she ran out of words. And when Lorraine was finally finished, when she'd poured out all her doubt and fear and uncertainty, Irene said something Lorraine would remember for the rest of her life. My father was a farmer during the Depression, lost everything in 1932. The bank foreclosed on 200 acres that had been in our family for 60 years. You know why he lost it? Why? Debt. He'd borrowed money in the 20s to buy a new thresher. Everyone was doing it. Equipment was getting bigger, fancier, more expensive. Dealers were pushing financing hard. He thought he had to keep up. The payment was manageable when prices were good, but when prices crashed in 1929, that payment destroyed him. He couldn't make it, couldn't refinance. The bank took everything. He spent the last 30 years of his life working other people's land, never owned anything again, died bitter and broken at 63 years old. Irene's voice got quiet. My father told me something before he died. Said it was the most important lesson he'd learned in all his years. You want to know what it was? Yes. He said, in farming, survival beats growth every single time. The guys who focus on getting bigger, they have spectacular wins, but they also have catastrophic losses. The guys who focus on surviving, on keeping what they have, they might not get rich quick, but they're still there 20 years later when all the gamblers are gone. They're still farming when everyone else is working in town. They're still teaching their grandchildren how to plant corn when everyone else is teaching their grandchildren how to punch a time clock. Lorraine felt something loosen in her chest. Something she hadn't realized was tight. So I'm not crazy. I'm not being too cautious. No, dear, you're being smart. And more than that, you're being brave. It takes more courage to stand alone doing what you know is right than to follow the crowd doing what everyone says is right. It's easy to borrow money when everyone's doing it. It's hard to say no when you're the only one. But Lorraine, you're doing the right thing. I know it. Your Uncle Theodore knew it. That's why he left you that land. Because he knew you'd take care of it.
Not exploit it, not leverage it. Take care of it.
They talked for another hour, and when Lorraine finally hung up and went to bed, even though it was only 8 o'clock at night, she slept deeply, dreamlessly. The sleep of someone who knows, deep in their bones, that they're on the right path, even if no one else can see it. Summer passed into fall. Harvest came. The corn made 90 bushels per acre, better than last year. Beans made 35. Prices were still high, $3.50 for corn, $7.60 for beans. Lorraine did the math. Her gross income was going to be over $35,000. After expenses, she'd net close to $28,000. Minus $12,000 for living expenses, she'd have $16,000 left over. She put $12,000 into savings, kept $4,000 as operating capital. Her total savings now stood at $22,000. No debt, positive cash flow, 2 tractors that ran perfectly. Meanwhile, her neighbors were taking on more debt.
Colette and Raymond Brennan bought an additional 40 acres in October. Borrowed $32,000 to make the down payment. Their total debt was now over $70,000. At 13% interest, that was over $9,000 a year just in interest payments. Before paying down any principal, Vivian and Garrett upgraded to a bigger house, sold their $85,000 house for $90,000, $5,000 profit, bought a new place for $165,000, put the $5,000 toward the down payment, and borrowed $150,000 at 14%. Their new house payment was $1,800 a month, $21,600 a year. Vivian also traded in the BMW, got a new Mercedes. Lease payment went from $450 to $650 a month, another $2,400 a year. At Thanksgiving that year, the gathering was at Irene's house, neutral territory. Lorraine brought her girls and a sweet potato casserole.
Tried to stay quiet, keep her head down, avoid conflict. But Vivienne found her in the kitchen after dinner. "Lorraine, I heard you had a good year." "Did okay. But you're still not expanding, still just farming the same ground with the same old equipment." Vivian's voice had that edge again, that need to prove something. "It's working." Vivian leaned against the counter, studied her nails. Perfect manicure, probably $50, then looked up with that smile that never reached her eyes. "You know what people say about you?" Lorraine didn't answer, kept washing dishes, didn't want this conversation. "They say you're scared, that you could have so much more if you just take a chance. But you're too afraid of risk, too comfortable being small, too content with being poor. It's actually kind of sad. You inherited all that land, all that opportunity, and you're wasting it because you're too scared to borrow money like a normal person." Something snapped inside Lorraine. Not violently, more like a thread that had been pulled taut for too long, finally breaking. She set down the dish she was washing, dried her hands deliberately, turned to face Vivian directly. "You want to know what I'm afraid of, Vivian? I'm afraid of lying awake at 3 a.m, wondering how I'm going to make a payment. I'm afraid of one bad year destroying everything I've built. I'm afraid of my daughters watching me lose our farm because I borrowed more than I could afford. That's what I'm afraid of. But we're not living in fear, Lorraine. We're living in abundance. We have a beautiful home, nice cars. We travel, we enjoy life. We give our daughter everything she wants. What do you give your daughters? Garage sale clothes and an old farmhouse that's falling apart. Do you sleep well? The question caught Vivian off guard. What? Do you sleep well? When you go to bed at night, do you fall asleep easily? Or do you lie there thinking about all the things you owe, all the payments you have to make, all the bills that are coming due? Vivian's face changed. Just for a second. A crack in the facade, and Lorraine saw it. The stress, the strain, the fear that lived underneath all that confidence, the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, the slowly dawning realization that maybe this wasn't sustainable. I sleep fine, Vivian said, but her voice was different now, less certain, almost defensive. Good, I'm glad. Lorraine picked up the dish towel. Because I sleep great. Every single night. I fall asleep within 5 minutes. Don't wake up until morning. No nightmares, no anxiety, no wondering if I can make the payment. And Vivian, that peace, that ability to sleep soundly, that's worth more to me than any Mercedes or any big house or any of the things you think make you better than me. She walked out of the kitchen, gathered her daughters. They left early, again. Seemed like Lorraine was always leaving Thanksgiving early. But as she drove home in that same old Chevy, now 9 years old, Darlene said something from the passenger seat. Mama, I'm glad we have our old tractors. Lorraine glanced over, surprised. Why's that, baby? Because you're happy. Aunt Vivian has all that nice stuff, but she doesn't seem happy. Not really. I see her face when she thinks no one's looking. She looks worried, scared. But you, Mama, you smile when you're working on the farm, even when it's hard, even when you're tired and dirty. You smile because you love what you're doing, and you're not scared all the time like she is. Lorraine reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand, felt tears sting her eyes, because Darlene was right. Despite everything, despite the judgment and the pressure and the doubt, Lorraine was happy, content, at peace. She had less than Vivian in material terms, but she had so much more in terms that actually mattered. And that peace was about to become the most valuable asset she owned, because 1981 was coming, and 1981 was going to change everything. The new year started quiet. January, February, March. Normal winter, normal spring prep. Lorraine maintained her tractors, ordered seed, made her plans, same as always, conservative, careful, sustainable, planning to plant the same 160 acres, no expansion, no risks. She heard rumors, whispers at the co-op, something about interest rates, something about the Federal Reserve, some guy named Paul Volcker who was trying to fight inflation by raising rates. But it seemed distant, abstract, not relevant to her small operation in central Illinois. After all, she had no debt. Interest rates didn't matter to someone who didn't owe money. Then June came, and with it, the earthquake that would reshape American agriculture for a generation. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates to levels not seen since the Civil War. The prime rate hit 21%, 21, numbers that seemed impossible, rates so high that nobody could have predicted them, nobody could have planned for them. Farm loans that had been at 12% when farmers took them out in 1979 or 1980, suddenly renewed at 18, 19, 20% when the terms ended. Equipment payments doubled overnight, land payments doubled, operating loans became crushing burdens that grew larger every year instead of getting paid down. A farmer who'd taken on a $650 monthly payment in 1980 suddenly faced a $920 payment in 1981. That was an extra $3,240 a year for the same tractor, the same debt, just a higher interest rate. And that was if the bank would even renew the loan. Many banks, seeing the writing on the wall, started calling loans early, demanding full payment immediately. No negotiation, no payment plans. Just pay us everything you owe right now or we foreclose. But the interest rate spike was only half the crisis. The other half was grain prices. President Carter, in response to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, had placed an embargo on grain exports to Russia. President Reagan continued it. Suddenly, the export markets that had driven prices to record highs disappeared overnight. Corn, that had been $3.50 a bushel, crashed to $2.10. Soybeans went from $7.60 to $5.20. Wheat collapsed from $4.50 to $3.20. The math was simple, brutal, fatal. Higher payments plus lower income equals disaster. Lorraine heard about it first at church, a Sunday in July, standing in the parking lot after service. The heat was oppressive, humid, the kind of day where your clothes stick to your skin. One of the farmers, Jim Patterson, looked like he'd aged 10 years in a month. Someone asked how he was doing. "Not good," Jim said. His voice was hollow, empty. "Bank called my equipment loan, want the full balance in 90 days, $38,000. I don't have it. Even if I sold everything, I wouldn't have it. I might lose everything." The crowd went quiet. What do you say to that? What comfort can you offer when a man is about to lose everything his family built for 3 generations? Lorraine drove home feeling sick. Jim Patterson farmed 400 acres, had 2 kids in college, was one of the most respected farmers in the county. Good farmer, hard worker, did everything right. And he was about to lose it all because of interest rates he couldn't control and grain prices he couldn't predict. 2 weeks later, she got the call from Colette, middle of the afternoon. Lorraine was in the barn, fixing a bearing on the 560, when she heard the phone ringing in the house. She ran inside, picked it up, heard Colette's voice, barely above a whisper, shaking, on the edge of something terrible. "Lorraine, can you come over, please?" "Of course. What's wrong?" "Just come, please. I need you." Lorraine dropped everything, drove the 2 miles to Colette's farm, found her sitting on the porch steps, crying. Not the quiet, dignified crying of someone who's sad, the raw, gasping crying of someone who's breaking. Raymond was in the field working, didn't know his wife was falling apart, didn't know everything they'd built was crumbling. Lorraine sat down next to her, put her arm around her shoulders, didn't say anything, just sat there. Sometimes that's all you can do. Finally, Colette spoke. "Our loan renewed last week, the $4,440. The payment went from $650 a month to $920. Lorraine felt like she'd been punched. $920? Almost $1,000 a month, Lorraine, for a tractor, just a tractor. That's $11,040 a year. We netted $22,000 last year. After the land payment and living expenses and everything else, we can't make it. We just can't. The math doesn't work anymore." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. Raymond wants to borrow more, take out an operating loan to cover the payments until things get better. But Lorraine, what if things don't get better? What if they get worse? What if we take out more loans and then we can't pay those either? We'll just be digging the hole deeper." "Have you told him how you feel?" "I've tried. He says I worry too much, that everyone carries debt, that it's normal, that we just need to weather the storm and things will turn around." Colette looked at Lorraine with eyes that held no hope. "But I don't think they will. I think this is just the beginning. And I'm scared, Lorraine. I'm so scared I can barely breathe." They sat there for a long time. 2 women on a porch step in the July heat. One crying, one trying not to. And Lorraine realized something with absolute clarity. She'd been right. All along, she'd been right. The caution that everyone mocked, the conservative approach that everyone criticized, the old tractors that everyone laughed at, they were going to save her life. Because while Colette sat there sobbing about a $920 monthly payment she couldn't afford, Lorraine had no payment at all. 0. Nothing. Her tractors were paid for, had been from the day she bought them. But the realization brought no satisfaction, no vindication, no sense of being proven right. Just sadness. Deep, aching sadness for her friend who was suffering. for all the farmers who were suffering, good people who'd been told to borrow, encouraged to grow, promised that land values would keep rising, grain prices would stay high, and nothing would ever go wrong. And now it was all coming apart, and there was nothing she could do but watch. Lorraine stayed with Colette for 3 hours, held her while she cried, made her tea, talked about everything and nothing, and when she finally drove home, she went straight to the barn, found the Super MTA sitting there in the dim light, 27 years old, paint faded, body scarred, but paid for. She put her hand on the hood, felt the metal, still warm from that morning's work, and she whispered something she'd never said out loud before. Thank you. Thank you for saving my life. Because that old tractor, that piece of equipment everyone had mocked, had just become the difference between survival and destruction. The crisis was just beginning. The interest rates would stay high for years. The grain prices would stay low. And over the next 6 years, half the farms in her county would disappear, foreclosed, auctioned, destroyed by debt they couldn't service when times got hard. But Lorraine Whitmore, with her 2 old Farmalls and 0 debt, was going to weather it all. While all around her, farms that had been in families for generations were about to vanish like morning fog in the summer sun. What Lorraine didn't know, what nobody knew in June of 1981, was that they were witnessing the beginning of the worst agricultural crisis since the Great Depression. The 1980s farm crisis would destroy over 300,000 farms, would drive thousands of farmers to bankruptcy, divorce, even suicide, would reshape American agriculture forever. And through it all, 2 old Farmalls, a 1954 Super MTA and a 1965-60, bought for a combined total of $2,100 at an auction where everyone laughed, would keep running, keep working, keep proving that sometimes the best equipment is simply the equipment you own. The worst was still to come. But Lorraine was ready, not because she was smarter than everyone else, not because she'd seen it coming, but because she'd made one simple choice that everyone said was wrong. She'd refused to borrow money she couldn't afford to repay, and that choice was about to save everything. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It came in waves, slow at first, then faster, then devastating. By the fall of 1981, the full scope of the crisis was becoming clear. This wasn't a temporary dip. This wasn't a correction. This was a fundamental restructuring of American agriculture, and it was going to destroy anyone who couldn't survive on razor-thin margins with crushing debt loads. Lorraine saw it everywhere. At the co-op, where farmers stood in line to buy seed on credit they might never be able to repay. At church, where the prayer requests grew longer each week. At the diner, where conversations that used to be about weather and baseball scores now revolved around foreclosures and bankruptcy. The stress was visible on every face. Men who'd farmed their whole lives looked haunted. Wives who'd raised families on these farms looked terrified. Children sensed something was wrong but couldn't understand what. Jim Patterson was the first in their immediate area to go under. He made it to the spring of 1982 before the bank foreclosed. Took his land, his equipment, everything. The farm that had been in his family since his grandfather homesteaded it in 1919. 63 years, 3 generations, gone in an afternoon auction. Jim and his family moved to town. He got a job at the grain elevator, $22,000 a year, less than half what he'd made farming. Worked there until he retired at 65, never owned land again, never spoke about farming again. It was too painful. Tom Miller was next, then Bob Anderson, then the Hendricks brothers, both of them losing their farms within 6 months of each other. One by one, farms that had survived the Depression, survived droughts, survived every challenge agriculture had thrown at them for decades, disappeared. Sold at auction for pennies on the dollar, banks recovering what they could. Farmers left with nothing but debt they'd never be able to repay. Through it all, Lorraine kept farming. The Super MTA kept running. The 560 kept working. 28 and 22 years old now. Old, slow, obsolete by modern standards, but paid for. Her costs were minimal, no equipment payments. The land was hers, free and clear, no mortgage. Just seed, fertilizer, fuel, living expenses. Maybe $15,000 a year total to operate. In the bad years, and there were several in the mid-80s, Lorraine made less money. A lot less. Her net income dropped as low as $8,000 in 1984, when a drought cut her yields in half. But $8,000 with no payments was survivable. $8,000 with payments would have meant foreclosure. She never missed buying seed for the next year, never missed paying property taxes, never worried about the bank calling her loans, because she didn't have any loans to call. But watching her neighbors suffer was agony. These weren't strangers. These were people she'd known for years, had sat next to in church, had helped with harvests, had borrowed equipment from, had shared meals with. And now they were losing everything. Colette held on longer than most. She and Raymond refinanced in 1982, adding 3 months of missed payments to the principal. Took out an operating loan in 1983 for $20,000 at 18% just to plant the crop. Colette got a job in town in 1984, working nights at the hospital as a nurse. Raymond worked the farm during the day, then did odd jobs on weekends to bring in extra cash. They were killing themselves trying to keep the farm. Lorraine helped where she could, let them borrow equipment for free, helped with fieldwork when she could spare the time, brought over meals when she knew they were too exhausted to cook, did what neighbors do. But she couldn't save them. Nobody could. The call came on a Tuesday morning in May of 1985. Lorraine was having coffee, reading the newspaper, when the phone rang. She picked it up, heard Colette's voice. Flat. Dead. All the emotion burned out of it by 6 years of stress and fear and slowly losing everything. Lorraine, the bank called all the loans, everything, the equipment, the land, the operating loans. They want full payment in 90 days. Lorraine's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. How much? $89,000. A pause. The sound of Colette breathing, or trying to. We don't have it. Even if we sold everything we own, we wouldn't have it. We're going to lose it all. Oh, Colette. The foreclosure sale is set for July 20th, a Saturday. They're selling everything. The land, the equipment, the house, everything Raymond's family built for 3 generations. Gone. 3 days before the auction, Colette showed up at Lorraine's farm, unannounced. 10 in the morning on a Thursday. Lorraine was in the barn doing maintenance on the Super MTA when she heard a car pull up. She walked out into the sunlight, saw Colette getting out of her car, and something about the way she moved, something about her posture, made Lorraine's heart start pounding. "Colette, are you okay?" She wasn't. Her hands were shaking, hair unwashed, clothes wrinkled, eyes hollow like she hadn't slept in days, which she probably hadn't. "I need to tell you something. Before Saturday, before everyone sees, before it becomes public." "Okay." Colette's voice was barely a whisper. "I tried to kill myself last night." The words hung in the air, terrible, final, impossible to take back. Oh, Colette. Lorraine reached for her friend, but Colette stepped back, needed to say it all before she could accept comfort. "Pills. I took half a bottle of sleeping pills, sat in my car in the garage with the engine running. It seemed easier than Saturday, easier than watching strangers bid on my life, easier than watching my children watch me lose everything their grandparents built. So I just decided to not be there. Let Raymond deal with it. Let him tell the kids that Mommy got sick. But you're here now." "Because Raymond found me, called 911. They pumped my stomach at the hospital, sent me home this morning with a prescription for antidepressants and a pamphlet about financial stress." Colette laughed, but it was a broken sound. Like a pamphlet is going to help. Like antidepressants are going to change the fact that on Saturday, I'm going to lose everything. Lorraine grabbed Colette by the shoulders, made her look up, made her listen. "Listen to me. You're going to survive this. Not because you want to, because you have to. Those kids need you. Raymond needs you. And 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you're going to look back and be grateful you didn't make that choice in your car last night." "How do you know? How can you possibly know that?" "Because I almost did the same thing." Colette's eyes widened. "What?"
6 months after my husband died, I had 2 little girls, no income, no idea how to farm. Everyone was telling me to sell the land, move to town, get a regular job. And one night, I sat in my car with a bottle of my husband's leftover pain pills, had them in my hand, thought about how much easier it would be to just go be with him, let someone else deal with the farm, let someone else raise my daughters, just give up. What stopped you? Darlene. She came out of the house looking for me, 9 years old, knocked on the car window, said, "Mama, are you coming in?" I made us hot chocolate. And I looked at her little face in the window, so innocent, so trusting, and I realized that no matter how hard things got, she needed me more than I needed an easy way out. Lorraine pulled Colette into a hug, held her while she cried, really cried. The kind of crying that comes from years of holding it together, finally letting go. "You're going to come to that auction on Saturday," Lorraine said quietly. "You're going to stand there with your head up. And you're going to show your children that you can survive anything, that losing things doesn't mean losing yourself, that material possessions aren't worth your life. And Colette, I'm going to be right there with you, every step." The foreclosure sale was set for July 20th, 1985, a Saturday, hot and humid, the kind of summer day where the air feels thick enough to chew, the kind of day where tempers run short and patience runs shorter. Lorraine arrived early, didn't want to go, knew she had to. This was her friend, her neighbor. The least she could do was be there, bear witness, show that someone cared. The auction yard was packed, maybe 200 people, some there to bid, most just there to watch. There's something about a farm auction, a foreclosure. It draws people. Some come out of sympathy, some out of curiosity, and some, God help them, come because watching someone else's misfortune makes them feel better about their own struggles. Colette stood off to the side with Raymond. Both looked 20 years older than they should. Colette had lost weight. Her face was gaunt, hollow, cheekbones too sharp. Raymond's hands shook. He kept them in his pocket so people wouldn't see. Their 3 children stood with them, teenagers now, old enough to understand what was happening, young enough to be devastated by it. The auctioneer was Dutch Williams, same man who'd auctioned the Farmalls to Lorraine 6 years earlier. He worked through the household items first, furniture that had been in Colette's family for 3 generations, dishes that her grandmother had brought from Poland, tools that Raymond's father had used, things that should have been passed down to children and grandchildren, sold to strangers for nothing. Lorraine watched Colette's face crumble with each item sold, watched her turn away, shoulders shaking, watched Raymond try to hold himself together and fail. Then the equipment, the 4440 that had caused all this trouble, the tractor that Colette and Raymond had bought in 1980 for $42,000. Beautiful machine, only 5 years old, well-maintained, gleaming green and yellow, still almost new. Dutch started the bidding at $25,000. Nobody moved. $20,000. Nothing. $18,000. Finally, someone bid $15,000. After a brief flurry of bids, the tractor sold for $18,000. Less than half what they'd paid for it. Less than half what they still owed. Lorraine watched Colette's face as the gavel came down, watched something break inside her friend, something that might never be fixed. The land came up last. 280 acres. Good ground, well-drained, had been in Raymond's family since his grandfather homesteaded it in 1919. 66 years, 3 generations. The land where Raymond had learned to farm from his father, where he'd taught his own children to drive a tractor, where he'd planned to teach his grandchildren someday. It sold for $180,000. They'd owed $220,000. After the bank took their cut, after the auction fees and back taxes and penalties and everything else, Colette and Raymond were left with nothing, worse than nothing. They still owed $42,000 on assets they no longer owned. After the auction, Lorraine found them loading their personal items into a borrowed truck. Everything they owned now fit in the back of a pickup. She walked over, didn't know what to say. What can you say to people who've just lost everything? Raymond saw her first. His eyes were red. He'd been crying.
A 60-year-old man who'd worked this land his entire life, crying in front of strangers. No shame in it, just raw grief. "Lorraine," he said. His voice was rough, broken. "You were right. Back in '79 when you bought those old Farmalls and everyone laughed. You were right. You saw something the rest of us didn't." "Raymond, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry. You tried to warn us. I remember we were at the co-op, spring of '80. You said something about how when everyone's confident, that's when you get nervous. I thought you were just being pessimistic, overly cautious. But you were being smart. You were seeing clearly when the rest of us were blinded by greed and optimism." Colette turned around. Her face was streaked with tears, mascara running. She'd tried to dress nice for this, for the destruction of her family's legacy. She'd put on makeup and a nice dress, like this was a social event instead of a funeral. "Frank Morrison told us we needed that tractor," Colette said, her voice shaking with anger and grief. "The banker said the loan was smart. The agricultural economist said we needed to grow or die. Everyone said we needed to modernize and expand and leverage up. And we believed them. We believed every word. And now look at us." She gestured at the truck, at their lives packed in boxes, at the land behind them that they no longer owned. "We believed them, and now we're homeless. Now we're moving into a 2-bedroom apartment in town. Now I'm working night shifts at the hospital, and Raymond's stocking shelves at Walmart. Now our kids are telling their friends they don't know where they'll go to college because we can't afford it anymore." Lorraine pulled her into a hug, held her while she sobbed, felt her own tears coming, because this wasn't fair. Colette and Raymond were good people, hard workers. They'd done everything right, except listen to the wrong advice from people who profited from their decisions. "Where will you go?" Lorraine asked. "Town. We rented an apartment on 3rd Street. 2 bedrooms, $600 a month. Don't know how we'll fit 5 people in there, but it's what we can afford." Raymond's voice was hollow, empty. "I start at Walmart next Monday, $15 an hour. Colette's going back to nursing full-time, 40 hours a week instead of part-time. The kids, I don't know. They were supposed to go to college. Now I don't know if we can even afford community college." Before Lorraine could respond, Dutch Williams walked over. He was carrying a small slip of paper, a receipt. "Lorraine, someone wants to donate this to you." He handed her the paper. It was for the 1958 Farmall 450 that had been in Colette's equipment, small tractor. Lorraine had seen Colette use it for light work around the farm. "Who donated it?" "Colette did. Made me promise to give it to you. Said you'd take care of it better than whoever else might buy it. Said you deserved it for being the only one who made the right choices." Lorraine looked over at Colette. Their eyes met across the crowded auction yard, and in that moment, something passed between them. Understanding. Respect. A recognition that they'd walked different paths and arrived at different destinations. But there was no judgment, no superiority, just deep, aching sadness for what might have been. Lorraine bought the 450 for $1,800, loaded it on a trailer Earl Jackson lent her, took it home, parked it in the barn next to the Super MTA and the 560. 3 old Farmalls now. Combined age of 82 years. Combined purchase price, less than $4,000. And every time Lorraine looked at that 450, for the next 40 years, she thought of Colette. Remembered what happened when good people followed bad advice. Remembered the cost of debt when times got hard. But Colette and Raymond weren't the only ones. Over the next 2 years, 1985 to 1987, 6 of the 8 farms within 5 miles of Lorraine's place went under. Tom Miller, Bob Anderson, the Hendricks brothers, both of them, Jim Patterson's cousin, Mike Sullivan, all gone, all foreclosed, all destroyed by debt they couldn't service when the agricultural boom became an agricultural bust. The county that had once had 80 working farms now had 35, more than half gone in 6 years. Families that had farmed for generations suddenly working in town. Children who'd planned to inherit farms inheriting nothing. A way of life disappearing like smoke. And then, in November of 1986, Frank Morrison's dealership closed.
Lorraine heard about it at the co-op. Someone mentioned it casually, like it was just another piece of news. Frank Morrison's John Deere dealership had gone out of business. After 23 years,
The doors were locked. The inventory was being liquidated. The building was for sale. He couldn't sell new equipment when nobody could afford payments. Couldn't make money on used equipment that had lost half its value and still wasn't selling. Couldn't survive when his entire business model depended on farmers taking on debt, and half the farmers in the county were bankrupt. Lorraine drove by one afternoon in December, looked at the empty lot, the building with a "for sale" sign, the showroom that used to gleam with new tractors now dark and empty. She thought about the day she'd walked in there, desperate and hopeful, and Frank had tried to sell her a $38,000 tractor she couldn't afford. If she'd listened to him, she'd be gone now too, foreclosed, bankrupt, working in town somewhere, trying to rebuild a life from the ashes. But she hadn't listened. She'd bought 2 old Farmalls instead. And those tractors, those pieces of equipment Frank had called junk, had saved her life. She heard later that Frank had moved to Florida, retired early at 53 with the money he'd made selling debt to farmers who couldn't afford it. Never sold another tractor, never came back to Illinois, never had to face the people he'd helped destroy with his sales pitches and his financing schemes and his promises that debt was normal, necessary, smart. Through the worst of the crisis, 1982 through 1987, Lorraine kept farming. Her income was lower than the boom years, some years painfully low. In 1984, drought cut her yields in half. She netted only $8,000. In 1986, grain prices hit bottom. She netted $11,000, barely above poverty level. But she survived. More than survived. She saved money, slowly, carefully, putting away every dollar she could spare, living even more frugally than before, driving the Chevy until it had 200,000 miles on it, Buying clothes at thrift stores, growing vegetables in a garden, canning food for winter, living like her grandparents had lived during the Depression. And slowly, her savings grew. 15,000, 20,000, 30,000. By 1989, she had $42,000 in the bank. 10 years of farming, 10 years of living below her means, 10 years of saying no to things she wanted so she could say yes to financial security. And then, in early 1990, an opportunity came. The Morrison farm, adjacent to her eastern property line, came up for sale. The Morrisons had lost it in 1985, one of the foreclosures. The bank had held onto it for 5 years, renting it out year by year to cover taxes and maintenance. Now, they wanted to sell. Were tired of managing it, wanted it off their books. 80 acres, good ground, well drained, would fit perfectly with Lorraine's operation. Bordered her land on the east, would give her 270 acres total. Enough to be a real operation. Enough to pass on to her daughters if they wanted it. The asking price was $68,000. That was $850 per acre. Fair price for 1990. Land values had crashed during the crisis, but were starting to stabilize. Lorraine had $42,000 in savings. She could put that down as a down payment and finance the remaining $26,000. Rates were reasonable now, post-crisis rates, around 8%. The payment would be maybe $300 a month. She could handle that. She thought about it for 3 days, did the math 100 different ways, talked to her daughters, now 21 and 19, talked to Irene, prayed about it, lost sleep over it, because this would be the first debt she'd taken on since buying those Farmalls 11 years ago. But then she thought about the 1980s, about Colette and Raymond, about all the farmers who'd lost everything because they'd borrowed money they couldn't afford to repay when things went wrong. And she made a different decision. She waited, kept farming, kept saving, and 60 days later, the real estate agent called her back. "Lorraine, I've got a situation. The buyers who were interested backed out, couldn't get financing approved. The bank really wants this property sold. They're hemorrhaging money on property taxes and maintenance. They take $60,000 cash if someone could close quick, 30 days or less." Lorraine thought about it, called Irene that night. "Irene,
I need to borrow $20,000. I'll pay you back at 6% over 5 years. That's my word, my promise. There was maybe 30 seconds of silence on the line. Then Irene said one word. Yes. That was it. Just yes. No questions about collateral, no concerns about risk, no demands for documentation.
Just faith in the woman who'd married her son and raised her grandchildren and survived when stronger people had failed. Lorraine sold some savings bonds her uncle Theodore had left her. That gave her $18,000. Combined with the $42,000 she'd saved, plus the $20,000 from Irene, she had $80,000. She offered the bank $60,000 cash, closing in 30 days. They accepted immediately. In March of 1990, Lorraine Whitmore bought 80 acres free and clear, added it to her 190. Now she had 270 acres, all paid off. No mortgage, no debt except the personal loan to Irene, which she paid back in 4 years instead of 5. She farmed it all with her 3 old Farmalls. The 1954 Super MTA, now 36 years old. The 1965-60, now 30 years old. The 1958 450 from Colette's auction, now 32 years old. Combined age of 98 years. Combined purchase price, including repairs over the years, under $5,000. They kept working, kept rumming, kept proving that paid for beats payment required. In 1995, another opportunity came, 120 acres north of her property. The owner, an elderly widow named Mrs. Henderson, wanted to retire, move to town to be near her daughter. She'd been leasing the land out since her husband died. Now, she just wanted to sell and simplify her life. Stop worrying about tenants and maintenance and property taxes. Asking price was $110,000, about $917 per acre. A little high, but good ground. And it would give Lorraine 390 acres total, a substantial operation, something she could be proud of, something she could pass on. Lorraine had been farming for 16 years now, had saved another $35,000 since the last purchase. But $110,000 was more than she'd ever spent on anything, more than she'd ever contemplated spending. She thought about it for a week, did the math 100 different ways, finally decided she'd take out a loan, but she'd structure it carefully, very carefully. She'd learned from watching her neighbors lose everything. She took out a loan for $75,000, put down $35,000, 15-year note at 8%. Payment was $717 a month. High, uncomfortable, but manageable even in bad years, and critically, she could pay it off early without penalty. She bought the 120 acres in March of 1995. Then she farmed harder than she'd ever farmed, kept her personal expenses even lower than usual, lived like a monk, put every extra dollar toward that loan. She paid it off in 8 years, by 2003, 12 years ahead of schedule, wrote the final check on a Tuesday afternoon in July, stood in the bank lobby with that paid-off mortgage in her hand and cried, because it was done. She owned 390 acres free and clear. No debt, no payments, just land that was hers. By 2004, at age 56, Lorraine Whitmore owned 390 acres worth about $400,000 at 2004 land values. All of it farmed over 25 years with equipment she'd bought used and paid for in cash. Her total equipment investment over a quarter century? About $18,000, including all repairs and maintenance. Compare that to farmers who'd financed one new tractor in 1980 for $42,000 and were still making payments on second and third generation replacement equipment 24 years later. Still trapped on the debt treadmill, still one bad year away from foreclosure. The 1954 Super MTA was now 50 years old and still her primary tractor. The 1965 160 was 44 years old and still working daily. She'd added a few more tractors over the years, always used, always paid for. But those 2 originals were still the backbone of her operation, still the machines she trusted most. Darlene had graduated from college in 1991, no student loans. Lorraine had paid her tuition from savings, 4 years at the University of Illinois, $48,000 total, paid in full. Becky graduated in 1993, also debt-free, another 48,000. Both daughters had watched their mother build something real through patience and discipline and refusing to quit. Both had learned that the best things in life come to those who can wait and work and refuse to follow the crowd. And then, in 2009, 30 years after she'd bought those 2 Farmalls at auction, Lorraine got a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. She was 61 years old now, still farming, though she'd started to slow down, thinking about retirement, maybe leasing the ground to a young farmer in a few years, living off the rental income and the savings she'd accumulated over 3 decades. The phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon in May. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick it up. "Hello, is this Lorraine Whitmore?" "Yes, this is Lorraine." "Lorraine, this is Frank Morrison. You probably don't remember me, but I remember you." Silence. Lorraine's mind raced back 30 years. The dealership, the auction, the public humiliation, the crisis years when Frank's customers had lost everything while he'd retired to Florida with his commission checks. "I remember, Frank. You owned the John Deere dealership, laughed at me when I bought 2 old Farmalls in 1979. A long pause on the line. Then, "So you do remember? I was hoping you'd forgotten that part." Hard to forget someone laughing at you in front of a crowd. "Yeah." His voice was different now, older, tired, smaller somehow. "That's actually why I'm calling. Lorraine, I owe you an apology, a big one. I treated you terribly. I mocked you. I pushed debt on young farmers who couldn't afford it. I built a business model that destroyed families, and I was wrong about everything." Lorraine sat down at her kitchen table. This was not what she'd expected. "Okay. When you bought those 2 old Farmalls in 1979, I laughed, called them junk, told you you'd fail, told you you needed a new 4240 to succeed, told you that debt was normal and necessary and smart. You remember all that?" "I remember. I was wrong, completely wrong. Those tractors weren't junk, and you didn't fail. You succeeded. You're still farming, still have your farm, built it up to almost 400 acres, I heard. Meanwhile, most of the guys I sold new equipment to, they lost everything, and my dealership went out of business because I built it on a model that destroyed my customers." Frank's voice cracked. "Lorraine, I've been thinking about it a lot. About the farmers who lost everything. About Colette Brennan and Raymond. About Jim Patterson and Tom Miller and Bob Anderson and all the others. Good men, good families, who trusted me, who believed me when I told them they needed debt to succeed. And most of them lost their farms because they listened to me." "Why are you calling now?" Lorraine asked quietly. "After 30 years?" "Because I'm dying. Cancer. Pancreatic. The doctors give me maybe 6 months. And before I go, I wanted to make some amends. Say some things I should have said a long time ago." He took a shaky breath. Lorraine could hear the weakness in it, the illness. "Lorraine, can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone." "Yes." "The day you bought those Farmalls, I knew they'd work. I'd seen farmers use Farmalls like that for decades. Reliable machines, good tractors. But I laughed at you anyway. Tried to humiliate you into buying something you couldn't afford. Because that's what I did. That was my job. Manufacture insecurity and sell the cure. Make people feel like they weren't good enough, weren't successful enough, unless they bought new equipment. Equipment they had to finance. Equipment that generated commission for me. Jesus, Frank. I know. And Lorraine, the worst part? I didn't just do it to you. I did it to everyone. Jim Patterson. He didn't want that second tractor. Said he couldn't afford it. But I convinced him. Told him he'd get left behind. Told him everyone was doing it. Sold him $40,000 of equipment on financing he couldn't afford. And when the crisis came, he lost everything. And I had already made my commission and moved on to the next customer. Frank was crying now, really crying. Colette Brennan. She came into my office in 1980. Said she was worried about the payment on that 4440. Said she couldn't sleep. Asked if they should return it. And I laughed at her. Told her she was worrying about nothing. Told her everyone carries debt. Told her to relax and enjoy the new tractor. I sold her the rope and then acted surprised when she used it to hang herself. Frank, no, let me finish. Please. I've got 6 months to live and 30 years of sins to atone for. I killed them, Lorraine. Not with a gun, but with a sales pitch and a financing contract. I killed Jim Patterson and Colette's dreams and the Hendricks brothers and dozens of others. And I did it for commission checks, for 8% on every loan, for money. But you were just doing your job. That's what I told myself for 23 years. But Lorraine, when you're the one standing there with the financing paperwork, when you're the one making the pitch, when you're the one saying, everyone's doing it, and you need this to succeed, you're not just doing your job. You're responsible. You're complicit. And I am. I'm responsible for a lot of destroyed families. Lorraine didn't know what to say. Part of her was angry, wanted to yell at this man who'd contributed to so much suffering. But another part, a bigger part, felt only pity. Because Frank Morrison had to live with what he'd done, had to see those faces every time he closed his eyes. And now he was dying, trying to make peace with a past he couldn't change. Frank, why are you really calling? Because I want to ask you something, a favor, the last thing I'll ever ask anyone. What? Tell your story. Really tell it. Write it down. Make a video. Put it on the internet. I don't care. But tell people what you did and why it worked. Because there are young farmers starting out right now who are being told the same things I told you. That they need new equipment. That debt is normal. That they have to grow or die. And most of them are going to believe it. Most of them are going to fail. But maybe, just maybe, if they hear your story, a few of them will make different choices. Will buy the old equipment. Will say no to debt. Will survive. Frank, please. This is the last thing I'll ever ask anyone. Let my legacy be that I destroyed a lot of families, but at least I tried to warn the next generation through you. Please. Lorraine thought about it. About 30 years of choices. About 2 old tractors that saved her life. About the farmers who hadn't made it. About the ones who might not make it in the future. I'll do it. I promise. Thank you. He sounded relieved, grateful. Lorraine, can I tell you one more?